bodily, compared to the subsequent non-bodily interpretation given by the Christian immaterialists. Rabbinic anthropology did not consider the soul to be immaterial or radically distinct from the body as the Platonists later taught. This is not what Rabbinical Judaism believed originally. Rabbinical anthropology differs from Hellenistic and later Christian anthropology. So the later times lost the original meaning in the rabbinic anthropology. The distinction between spirit and matter is not known in rabbinical literature. There is no differentiation. They're not opposites. Spirit is not the opposite of physical body. Metaphysically, soul and body form a whole, rather than a polarity. So, crudely put, the soul is like the battery that operates an electronic gadget. It may be different and originally external to the gadget, but the difference is not one of essence. More significantly, the gadget and its power source ultimately belong together rather than apart. Thus, the soul is considered the vitalizing agent, whose proper place is in the body, not out of the body. And he says, this is in his article, the body as the image of God. When we compare D&C 9333, we get something interesting. It says, for man is spirit. Man is spirit. But we are also body. We can see how closely parallel the Doctrine and Covenants section 93 is to the rabbinic understanding in the New Testament era of soul, spirit, and body. Very interesting. The elements are eternal, and spirit and element inseparably connected receive a fullness of joy. Joseph further explained his belief about spirit. He said, in tracing the thing to the foundation and looking at it philosophically, here we go, looking at it philosophically, here's how the philosophical aspects of spirit and body go together. We shall find a very material difference between the body and the spirit. The body is supposed to be organized matter, and the spirit by many is thought to be immaterial without substance. With this latter statement, we should beg to leave to differ, and state that spirit is a substance, that it is material, but that it is more pure, elastic, and refined matter than the body is, that it existed before the body, it can exist in the body, and it will exist separate from the body, when the body will be moldering in the dust, and will in the resurrection be again united with it. That's Joseph Smith's teaching. It ties in beautifully with the early rabbinic teaching, and as we'll notice, with the early Christian teaching as well. Even in first century Alexandria, and this is where the Hellenistic ideas were already firmly entrenched, Jewish incorporealism was a minority position. The majority of people believed in the corporeal deity, or deities. Harry Wolfson, author of the standard biography of Philo, he tells us that in the writings of Philo, he often opposed a traditional school of Alexandrian Judaism that interpreted the scriptures literally. So when we read Philo, we're not reading the majority view, we're reading about a philosopher who was arguing against the majority view in his allegories, in his taking away the literalism of the scriptures. He was arguing against that. That was the common belief, not Philo's writings. This is important to realize. You can't quote Philo and say, see, this is the standard belief of all the people. No, that was the innovation. He was arguing against the standard belief of all the people, according to Wolfson. He says, in the end, Wolfson admits that despite Philo's efforts to synthesize Jewish belief and Greek thought, Alexandrian Judaism at the time of Philo was of the same stock as Pharisaic Judaism in the New Testament, and it was flourishing in Palestine at this time. in the first century, the Jews in Alexandria, as well as in Palestine, in other words, almost universally believed in an embodied God.
Now, it's important to realize that it's important to realize that Judaism was the parent of early Christianity. If we keep that in mind, then we understand the significance of the statement that the Jews had a belief in an embodied God. And that the early Christians, of course, being converts from Judaism, also had this belief. Origen is probably one of the best examples of what happened when the Christians adapted pagan Greek philosophy. Origen adopted the Greek metaphysics. And because of that, Christians lost their way about what kind of being God is. And the kind of being that God was in early Christianity was a personalized being who was perfectly embodied, and we reflected that image. When we read Origen, we're not reading what the early Christians as a group en masse believed. We're reading his diatribes against the Christian doctrine of an embodied deity. Origen is one of the culprits, as it were, because, as Paulson noted, Origen wanted to please the philosophers. He was embarrassed by the literalism of the Scriptures, and he thought the philosophical thinking was the higher thinking, so he adapted it. In the process of adapting the philosophy that God is incorporeal and immaterial, Origen's writings is not about what the early Christians believed. It is about Origen trying to convince the early Christians that their belief in an embodied deity was wrong. It is Tertullian, the later church father, who instead of adapting philosophy as the basis for his truth, he stuck with the Scripture, and he tried to persuade the Christians that it is absolutely critical to keep the Scripture in mind, and therefore he taught the corporeal body and the corporeal spirit, as opposed to some of his early Christian contemporaries. So Tertullian is the hero, and Origen is the one that adapted the theme of an incorporeal, immaterial spirit that God is, because he took the philosopher's side. He allegorized the Scriptures, he spiritualized the Scriptures away, and we have some very powerful evidence for that I'd like to share with you right now.
Now, Origen, in his most important theological work, De Principiis, the First Principles, he enumerated the doctrines that he claims were delivered to the church by the apostles. Significantly, he did not include the doctrine of divine incorporeality on that list. The apostles did not have that doctrine, and they did not hand it down, because it wasn't the truth. It's not what they experienced, it's not what they wrote, and it's certainly not what they read in the Old Testament scriptures that they possessed. The Greek Septuagint was their main scripture.